Welcome to Kardec Radio, where you nourish your soul daily. As you wait for our next program, The Medium's Book, visit Kardec Publisher at kardecpublisher.com to check out our latest books. Also, check out our Kardec Flicks, Spiritism in a Click. Just go to kardecflix.com. And now with you, our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni, with the program The Medium's Book. Enjoy it.
Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Kardec Radio and welcome to another program in study of the Medium's Book. What a blessing, dear friends, to be here together. This book that it's unprecedented is for the first time that the Spirit's book it has been studied in its completion from beginning to end at Kardec Radio and in English. This is not available anywhere else. So we're so excited to be here. And let me show you, this is the physical book. Yes, we know it looks intimidating at first, but that's why we are here. Being in a community and studying together is so important. So that's why each week we're going chapter by chapter together so that we can together learn with Kardec and with the good spirits. Kardec, such a wise educator, he compiled this book in such a way for us that it is so didactic, it's so easy to follow, and at the same time, it's so deep, it is so rich. So today, we're gonna continue on part 2, chapter 23. And today we are talking about obsession. Yes, dear friends, we know a topic that it is so vital in our lives, so important for us to discuss this together as a group obsession. And we will go through this together. But before we go to the actual chapter that talks about obsession, let us first start with this question from the Spirit's book, because it's very important for us to understand that we are here incarnated, but we live in two realms, right? We're here in the physical plane, but there are spirits around us. Some say that for every incarnate spirits, we have 3 to 4 discarnate spirits. So we can imagine we are surrounded by spirits. Should we feel like it's Halloween? Is that spooky? Should we be afraid? No, we should not be afraid because spiritism, that's why we know, and that's why we study these books. Because we know we are all spirits. We don't need to be afraid of ghosts or evil spirits. We're all spirits. We're all brothers and sisters. And we temporarily have a physical body. But sooner rather than later, at some point, we don't know when, we will be called back to the spiritual realm because that is our true home. But Kardec very wisely, he asked the spirits, do the spirits that are this in the spiritual realm, right? Do the spirits influence our thoughts and our actions? So, what influence do they have in our daily lives? And this answer is so interesting because the spirits come and tell Kardec, the high spirits, that the influence of the spirits in our lives is greater than we suppose, that we imagine. For very frequently, it is they who guide us. Oh, wow, dear friends, how interesting is that? to know that, yes, in our daily lives, we are being influenced by the spirits to a greater extent that we can imagine. So, does that makes us feel different about our day-to-day lives and our actions? It should, because every time we should be thinking about, as we see in this chapter, who am I connecting to? Because we know we're not alone. So if the spirits exert an influence on our lives, who are we connecting to? Hmm. Wow, that is definitely food for thought. And we might be thinking, but Daisy, then how do I protect myself? What do I do? We'll get there, dear friends. We will get there. But first, let us go to the definition because we're talking about obsession. And Kardec, as a wise educator, he compiled this information for us in a way that's very easy for us to digest, to understand. But at the same time, he brings to us spiritism, remember, is also a science. So we need to have definitions and new terminologies. And obsession was, at the time when Kardec codified Spiritism, a new terminology. So, what is the definition of obsession? Well, obsession is, as defined by Kardec, a persistent negative influence of one mind over another. And we put together this diagram to illustrate for us because most of the time we think about obsession, we think about the first line here. We think a discarnate spirit is influencing negatively an incarnate spirit. Is that only the case? No, that's not only the case. That's the one that we hear the most, we talk the most, but there are other instances that we will discuss. But before we go there, the important thing here is this persistent negative influence. Why? Because obsession happens from a less evolved spirits. Illuminated spirits, high elevated spirits, they don't influence us negatively. On the contrary, they are always helping, always supporting us. So obsession happens because less evolved spirits affect us, which we are still learning. We're still in the same journey together. But something happens that we connect with one another, which we will discuss in this chapter. So, if obsession doesn't happen only from a discarnate to an incarnate, can it happen from an incarnate to a discarnate? Yes, it can. For example, a spirit discarnates, and then we are there thinking about the person. André Luiz describes this case for us in a couple of his books, several of his books, where we're there, we think we're just thinking. We're like, oh, but that person, they did this, that, and the other, and they are already in the spiritual realm. And every time we think about them, we think negatively. We are in this constant persecution for the person that is not even here anymore. So, is that an obsession? Yes. Through the definition and through what we learn in Spiritism, that is obsession. So, we can be obsessing those that are in the spiritual realm. They are trying to fly higher, they're trying to mind their business, but we keep calling them back with our thoughts, with our words, with our feelings, our actions. Can obsession happen between a discarnate and another discarnate? Yes, it can happen. Again, we see this again and again in André Luiz's books, how A spirit can affect another negatively in the spiritual realm. And can it happen from an incarnate? And we apologize, there is a typo here. Yes, there is a typo here, which we will fix because the last one should be an incarnate to an incarnate. Yes, dear friends, there we go. Now we're gonna be able to see it correctly. Yes, can it happen from an incarnate to another incarnate? Yes, it can happen. When every time we think about a person, we are there, we think we are at home by ourselves, but every time that person comes to our minds, we are thinking about them negatively. We are sending them mental darts over and over again. So we can be here in the physical realm, obsessing with someone that is also here incarnate. There's a case that illustrates this so well in André Luiz's books. A man is having an affair, and the wife discovers, and she is so upset. And it's in her bedroom, and she starts to think about this another woman whom her husband is having the affair, and she's so upset. She is sending that woman so much negativity and thinking about with so much hatred that André Luiz describes. It's like the other woman almost materialize in front of her. That is how much stronger is our mental connections. Yes. So Kardec tells us in this chapter that we're talking about mediumship, right? We can talk about obsession more widely, but today we're focusing specifically on obsession through mediumship, right? In specific in mediums. And he says obsession is one of the greatest obstacles of mediumship and is also one of the most frequent. So here is the answers. Why do we see examples over and over again of mediums that fail? For sure, obsession is behind it. But we need to go deeper. We need to understand the mechanics and we need to understand, are there different types of obsession? Yes, there are different types, and Kardec classified those to us in three main types of obsession. What he calls to us and describes as simple obsession, fascination, and subjugation. And as we go down this list, it becomes more serious and harder to um, break this connection. So, what is a simple obsession? Has the terminology already exemplifies to us? It is very common, Kardec says, and is characterized by a spirit interfering in the thoughts and the actions of a medium in the mediumistic work. So it is something that the medium is aware. They know that there is an interference. They know that the spirits come and they whisper in our ears. What? No, are you sure you're gonna go to the mediumistic meeting? No. Oh, come on. Are you sure you should be doing so much more? But it's more than just a common interference because it starts to a point that interferes with the mediumistic work. So, what do the spirits want to cause? They want to cause irritation, they want to cause annoyance, they want to cause confusion. So, the important thing with this simple obsession is that the medium is aware. One case that is widely known that we can talk about simple obsession, Divaldo Franco shared with all of us that throughout his life, for many decades, he had a spirit who was constantly, the iron mask, that's what he called it, trying to interfere in his works. And he knew, Divaldo knew he was there, he knew about his presence, but what he could do as a medium, he emanate prayers, he emanate loving feelings towards the spirit until a day, many years after Divaldo had already found the dimension of the way, after already Divaldo was doing so much work, psychographing books, traveling around the world, taking care of the children. One day, someone knocks at Divaldo's door in the middle of the night, and he opens, and there was a child there, a baby. Someone had left a baby. And the institution that Divaldo had at the time, not as big, but they were already at capacity. They couldn't anymore take any other children in. But Divaldo, very loving and caring, picks up that child and says, "No, little one, we will find a way for you to have a place to stay. We're not going to abandon you. You are not abandoned." And through that gesture, at that time, the spirit who was for decades on trying to interfere with Divaldo's work appears in front of him and says, "So, Divaldo, are you gonna really take this baby in? Do you really love this child?" And he very humbly says, "Not yet, but one day I will." And in that moment, dear friends, that's when the spirit finally saw that Divaldo was being sincere. And with tears in his eyes, he said, "Divaldo, this is my mother in a previous life. So what you just did, now you're helping my mother." And from that day on, he stopped persecuting Divaldo Franco. So do you see, dear friends, none of us, that's the one of the main messages of this chapter. None of us are so good, so pure that we will not go through this in our lives. The only pure spirit that ever touched this planet Earth is Jesus Christ. So, why do we need to know this? Because, as Kardec says, this is very common and all of us gonna go through it. But the important thing is that we discern when those thoughts come, we know those are not mine. I start to distinguish. Different than fascination. Fascination is much more serious because when obsession gets to the fascination level, the spirit deceives itself so much through this false appearance of virtue, making them seem that they are so elevated. And they lead to this delusion and false teachings through the medium. They paralyze the judgment of the medium. So the awareness is absent. The medium is completely blind and they do not believe they're being deceived. This is so dangerous, dear friends, and we see there are many stories of why so many mediums fail because of this. And the spirits, do you think that this happens from one day to the other? No. They are very, very wise. Do we think that they don't have a strategy? They do. They come and very slowly they start deceiving us, making us believe that we're hearing wonderful voices. They even say, I am Jesus Christ, I am Mother Mary, I am this, that, and the other. And the medium feeds our ego, right? So we start feeling, oh, I'm so good. I'm receiving messages from this spirit. And we're blind and our judgment is impaired. And then comes to the third type, subjugation. At the subjugation level, there is the true bondage between the spirit and the medium. In this case, we're talking in specific through obsession in mediumship, but this happens with all of us. So there's a true connection between the obsessor and the obsessed. The spirit makes the medium act in spite of himself. So all of a sudden, the medium feels that he needs to write, he needs to do something. So the impact is this completely mental and physical loss of control. The medium acts and speaks involuntary. So is awareness impact? Yes, it is. It might be absent. It might be somewhat impaired. The medium, the obsessed person might know they don't want to do that, but they cannot control it. The will of the medium is completely paralyzed. So we might be asking ourselves, how does obsession occurs? We need to go back and remember what we studied at the beginning of the book. There is the law of the mental field. We attract what we emit. So does this connection happens, let's say, out of the blue in the instance? Does it happens? There is a reason? Yes, because remember, Jesus is perfect. He's pure. We're still not. So there's still plugs inside of us that we open ourselves to make those connections. What are some of those? Let us talk more about them. What are the causes of obsessions? Well, first and foremost, our moral imperfections. It is the pride inside of us that connects us to those spirits, the vanity, the selfishness, this attachment to materialism. That can be one of the plugs or many of the plugs. There might be spiritual affinity, lower spirits who feel they're drawn by what we think, what we feel, what we watch. That's why it's so important that we focus on our inner reform. There might be connections through past lives, spirits who wants to come back because of hatred, vengeance, unresolved that emotional debts. How many times we see this in mediumistic meetings? Spirits coming in, and sometimes they've been persecuting the person for centuries for something that happened not only in the immediate past life, but many lives ago, but they are still there persecuting the person. And then also through our lack of vigilance or discipline, because of our frivolous and selfish intentions, we connect with the spirits. So Kardec brings to us, well, then How can obsession be recognized? We know there's a lot of information here, but in a sense, he says, how can we try to recognize it in mediumship specifically? Well, it is those instances where there is an insistent spirit communication that overrides the medium's will, as we're talking about. There is this uncritical acceptance of the message. So the medium accept the most absurd and false message without using our critical thinking. So there's this blind belief in the identity of the spirits. The medium might be overcome by flattery, as we were talking about before, which fits their pride. There is this reduction of guidance. If anyone wants to come in and say, are you sure you're going to trust that message or that communication? The media might get very, um, uh, they don't want to accept the criticism. There might be this compulsive need, as we're saying, to all of a sudden write a message or communicate. So there is this loss of control, involuntary speech, and the frequent disturbance of the spiritual phenomenon around the medium. So these are just some ways. Is it always going to happen that way? Is it going to be black and white? No, dear friends, it's very subtle. Very subtle. That's why we all practicing mediumship, we need to be very vigilant. So the main question for us is, how can we prevent obsession? Or how can we protect ourselves? Well, first and foremost, and that's why we're here on earth, incarnated, to work on our moral progress. If we cultivate humility, charity, self awareness, think about a very high elevated spirit like Jesus. Jesus didn't let himself be interfered. They want to interfere, but Jesus didn't go through the process of obsession because he's a pure spirit. But we need to work on those things inside ourselves. So the more good that we do, the better. If we cultivate prayer, how can we help someone who is obsessed? Prayer, prayer, prayer. There are times that Chico Xavier, in very extreme cases, will prescribe God at home meetings 3 times a day. The past is this spiritual treatment. That's why we need to seek spiritual help. If we isolate ourselves, or if a medium isolates him or herself, or anyone, that is a very, very severe case of obsession. So we need to be vigilant. Law society, society is a law. We cannot be all there by ourselves thinking we can practice mediumship by ourselves. There is a no, no. But it needs to come with study and discipline. If we don't learn the new, we're not going to be able to change. So then, through that, we start avoiding evoking the spirits who are frivolous or out of our curiosity or vanity. But has, again, the most power defensive of all is our moral reform. As we study and learn, as we're doing here right now, and we've been doing throughout this month, we protect ourselves against obsession. But Kardec says that, and we quote here, it is very harmful for mediums to work alone, dear friends, because there's no way for them to check the accuracy of the message. They, mediums, should seek feedback from others and study different types of spirit communication, compare and learn. Remember, study the language, analyze, the message. We need to use our critical thinking. If you haven't, go back, watch the previous programs where we talk about the different types of spirit communications and how to identify them. Because Kardec brings to us this critical thinking. Spiritism is not a blind faith, it pushes us to use our critical thinking to truly think about the types of communications that we are receiving. And Kardec says we cannot do that alone. That's why we need teamwork. If we don't know how to teamwork, we will not succeed in developing our mediumship. So, mediumship by ourselves isolate is a no, no. We need to be in a team. We need to think critically. We need to ask for feedback. We need to seek feedback from others. Because by yourself, dear friends, let us think about our most perfect guide and model. And that's how we will end the study tonight. Jesus. Jesus came as a pure spirit, as the governor of this beautiful planet Earth. Let us imagine, dear friends, Jesus, he created this planet with a team of Christ-like spirits. He's the governor of our planet. He came incarnate on earth and he didn't do the work by himself. He had a team. So who are we to think that we can do all by ourselves? No, no. So we need to do this mediumship as a team, but with Jesus. There's no way to practice mediumship and to protect ourselves against obsession without Jesus at the helm. Yes, as our dear Umberto de Campos says, Jesus at the helm. He is guiding the ship. We're there as a team working together, but he is our guide. He show us the direction. So we need to bring Jesus close to us. We need to study him, we need to follow him, and we need to practice mediumship with him as a team, thinking that the only way for us to protect ourselves is to work on identifying what are those plugs, where do the spirits connect. So when that voice comes, we know, we start to distinguish in the simple obsession before it turns into a fascination and a subjugation. But for those that need help, that's why we need spiritist centers. Again, that's why we don't stay in our homes. We go to the spiritist center because there we can receive spiritual treatment. There, these obsession meetings are happening and should be happening to help the group, to help the community, and to help our whole planet, dear friends. That is the hardest job because no one is seeing physically with the physical eyes, but with the immortal eyes, that is the true healing for our soul. So, dear friends, let us stay here with Jesus, with us, Jesus at the realm. We hope you have a beautiful day, a beautiful evening, and let us stay together. Yes, knowing that yes, obsession is present in our lives, but as Kardec says in this chapter, is beyond mediumship. It affects all of us. Here we're studying specific through the lenses of mediumship, but the lessons and the recipe applies to all of us. Dear friends, stay together here at Kardec Radio. Next week, we'll be back for another chapter, chapter 24. There's much more for us to learn. Go to our YouTube page, subscribe, look at our playlist, revise the chapters, go back to the videos. The whole study is there available with you. And we'll see you here next time. Bye bye.